What about you, Brutus? No, thanks, he said. What I'd like is a good hard knock of whiskey, but under the circumstances, that might not be a good idea. Janice looked at me, smiling mouth, worried eyes. What are you getting these boys into, Paul? But before I could even think of framing a reply, she raised her hand and said, Never mind, I don't want to know. 3. Later, long after the others were gone and while I was dressing for work, she took me by the arm, swung me around, and looked into my eyes with fierce intensity. Melinda? She asked. I nodded. Can you do something for her, Paul? Really do something for her, or is it all wishful dreaming brought on by what you saw last night? I thought of Coffee's eyes, of Coffee's hands, and of the hypnotized way I'd gone to him when he'd wanted me. I thought of him holding out his hands for Mr. Jingles's broken, dying body. While there's still time, he had said. And the black swirling things that turned white and disappeared. I think we might be the only chance she has left, I said at last. Then take it, she said, buttoning the front of my new fall coat. It had been in the closet since my birthday at the beginning of September, but this was only the third or fourth time I'd actually worn it. Take it. And she practically pushed me out the door. 4. I clocked in that night, in many ways the strangest night of my entire life, at 6:20. I thought I could still smell the faint, lingering odor of burned flesh on the air. It had to be an illusion. The doors to the outside, both on the block and in the storage room, had been open most of the day, and the previous 2 shifts had spent hours scrubbing in there, but that didn't change what my nose was telling me, and I didn't think I could have eaten any dinner even if I hadn't been scared almost to death about the evening which lay ahead. Brutal came on the block at 6:45, Dean at 10 till. I asked Dean if he would go over to the infirmary and see if they had a heating pad for my back, which I seemed to have strained that early morning, helping to carry Delacroix's body down into the tunnel. Dean said he'd be happy to. I believe he wanted to tip me a wink, but restrained himself. Harry clocked on at 7:03. The truck? I asked. Where we talked about. So far, So good. There followed a little passage of time when we stood by the duty desk, drinking coffee and studiously not mentioning what we were all thinking and hoping, that Percy was late, that maybe Percy wasn't going to show up at all. Considering the hostile reviews he'd gotten on the way he'd handled the electrocution, that seemed at least possible. But Percy apparently subscribed to that old axiom about how you should get right back on the horse that had thrown you, because here he came through the door at 7:06, resplendent in his blue uniform, with his sidearm on one hip and his hickory stick in its ridiculous custom-made holster on the other. He punched his time card, then looked around at us warily, except for Dean, who hadn't come back from the infirmary yet. "My starter busted," he said. "I had to crank." "Aw," Harry said, "po baby. Should have stayed home and got the cuss thing fixed," Brutal said blandly. "We wouldn't want you straining your arm none, would we, boys?" "Yeah, you'd like that, wouldn't you?" Percy sneered, but I thought he seemed reassured by the relative mildness of Brutal's response. That was good. For the next few hours we'd have to walk a line with him, not too hostile, but not too friendly, either. After last night, he'd find anything even approaching warmth suspect. We weren't going to get him with his guard down, we all knew that, but I thought we could catch him with it a long piece from all the way up if we played things just right. It was important that we move fast, but it was also important, to me, at least, that nobody be hurt. Not even Percy Wetmore. Dean came back and gave me a little nod. "Percy," I said, "I want you to go on in the storeroom and mop down the floor." "Stairs to the tunnel, too. Then you can write your report on last night." "That should be creative," Brutal remarked, hooking his thumbs into his belt and looking up at the ceiling. "You guys are funnier in a fucking church," Percy said, but beyond that he didn't protest. Didn't even point out the obvious, which was that the floor in there had already been washed at least twice that day. My guess is that he was glad for the chance to be away from us. I went over the previous shift report, saw nothing that concerned me, and then took a walk down to Wharton's cell. He was sitting there on his bunk with his knees drawn up and his arms clasped around his shins, looking at me with a bright, hostile smile. "Well, if it ain't the big boss," he said. "Big as life and twice as ugly. You look happier'n a pig knee-deep in shit, Boss Edgecombe."